The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Darris with the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. I want to welcome you to our Affirmative Marketing Guidance webinar. Today, we're going to get started in approximately 5 minutes, so at 2:05. Just want to get a couple of items of housekeeping out of the way while we give people time to join and take care of any technical issues that may arise. So during the presentation today, we will be trying to answer questions. Go ahead and put any questions that you have into the questions box, and we will try to cover them either as we go or maybe at the end of the webinar, depending upon how complicated the question is or how well it fits into the timing. The other thing that you may notice is that we do have some handouts for this webinar in the handouts section of GoToWebinar. Included in those are today's slides, so if you want to take notes and follow along, those are included there for you in a PDF format. If you want to make sure that your audio is working properly, go ahead and open the audio tab, and you can use the sound test option there to make sure that you're getting the best audio experience possible. And then finally, while we're waiting for everybody to get in and situated, we're going to go ahead and put up a poll. If you could just go ahead and answer as best you can. It's not a test. There's no right or wrong answer. We just want to get an idea of who's joining us today and what they'd like to get out of today's webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to put that poll up, and we're going to get started at 2:05. Good afternoon again, everybody, and welcome to the Affirmative Marketing Training webinar today, presented by the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. Included in your handouts, you'll find today some of the forms that we'll be going over, as well as some technical assistance documents and the slides for today. If you want to print those out, go ahead and do so. You can take notes as we go along. My name is Nathan Darris, and I'm the Fair Housing Specialist at the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and I'm really glad to see a lot of you here today. Today's training is obviously on affirmative marketing, and it looks like about half of everybody here is with a property management company, either on-site or with compliance staff. And then the rest of you are split out between nonprofit and advocacy organizations and state and local governments. So it's a pretty good mix today, but a lot of property management. Just a quick disclaimer for today's webinar. This material is based on work supported by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, but the views and findings expressed in this training do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then before we begin, again, just a little bit of housekeeping. I want to note that all materials and recordings of this webinar will be available on the Tdhca website. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions box. After every segment, we will try to answer the questions that are in there, or we may hold them off until the end. It depends on how they relate to what the current topic is. This training is informational only, and it does not satisfy requirements for post-bond closing documentation or for the 10% test for housing tax credits. So if you are here, you will not get credit for that particular purpose, but we do recommend that you stick around because it is still going to be full of good information that you may find useful. This session is probably going to last approximately 90 minutes, and it will be presented primarily by myself, Nathan Darris, the Fair Housing Research Specialist here at Tdhca, and with me today will be Kate Trace, the Fair Housing Manager. So these are some of the topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to start by talking about the Fair Housing Act and how that applies to affirmative marketing. Then we're going to get into an overview of affirmative marketing. And then we'll talk about the requirements for your affirmative marketing plan, and then how to develop your affirmative marketing plan. And that's going to include information for both single-family and multifamily program participants. And then finally, we'll have some procedures and best practices for implementing your affirmative marketing plan after you've made it or written it. So after end of today's training, what we want you to be able to do is understand what affirmative marketing is and what fair housing is and how they are connected. Then develop or know how to develop an affirmative marketing plan, and then know how to implement your affirmative marketing plan effectively. So we'll start with the Federal and Texas Fair Housing Acts. The Federal Fair Housing Act is the policy of the United States to provide within constitutional limitations for fair housing throughout the United States. No person shall be subjected to discrimination because of their race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, or national origin when it comes to the sale, rental, or advertising of dwellings, or in the provision of brokerage services, or in the availability of real estate-related transactions. Section 808E5 of the Act is to affirmatively further the purposes of the Fair Housing Act, which includes ensuring a positive outreach and informational effort to those who are least likely to know about and apply for the housing in question. Each applicant for participation in housing programs of the Department of Housing and Urban Development shall pursue affirmative fair housing marketing policies in soliciting buyers, tenants, and in advertising the availability of housing properties. For the rest of this session today, CFR is going to stand for Code of Federal Regulations, which is a document that contains all regulations published in the Federal Register and is divided into 50 sections. Housing and Urban Development is found in Title 24, which is where the majority of the Fair Housing Act regulations are also located. Also, where the word handicap appears in statute or regulation, we're going to use the word disability for the rest of the presentation. The term handicap is considered to be antiquated at this point. One thing to note is that while we did mention the Texas Fair Housing Act, the Texas Fair Housing Act is substantially similar to the Federal Fair Housing Act in that it does not include any new protections and does not include any new protected classes that are not already covered by the Federal Fair Housing Act. So for the purposes of the rest of today's webinar, the two are going to be, we're going to refer to the Fair Housing Act and that'll be the Federal Fair Housing Act. So let's get into the fun stuff, the affirmative marketing overview. So in this section, we're going to discuss the affirmative marketing policy and requirements for your affirmative marketing plan. Affirmative fair housing marketing and outreach is a requirement per statute, executive order, and regulation. Statutory authority exists in the Fair Housing Act. It exists in Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, also Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and Executive Order 11063 also provides that all federal executive departments and agencies must act to end discriminatory practices for properties receiving federal financial assistance. All applicants for participation in federal housing agency subsidized and unsubsidized multifamily housing programs with 5 or more units must complete an affirmative fair housing marketing plan as specified in the Code of Federal Regulations. This plan will help owners and agents or respondents effectively market the availability of housing opportunities to individuals of both minority and non-minority groups that are least likely to apply for occupancy. Affirmative fair housing marketing and planning should be part of all new construction, substantial rehabilitation, and existing project marketing and advertising activities. It is the policy of HUD to administer its FHA housing programs affirmatively as to achieve a condition in which individuals of similar income levels in the same housing market area have a like range of housing choices available to them, regardless of their race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, or national origin. Each applicant for participation in FHA subsidized and unsubsidized housing programs shall pursue affirmative fair housing marketing policies in soliciting buyers, tenants, and in determining their eligibility and in concluding sales and rental transactions. HUD sets forth rules for affirmatively marketing to eligible households of single-family programs and multifamily programs. The federal rule citations are here for your reference. However, if all of these citations seem like a lot to keep in mind, keep in mind that TDHCA's requirements will help you meet HUD's requirements for TDHCA programs. If you receive HUD funds directly, you will need to follow HUD's affirmative marketing requirements. But for the rest of this presentation, we're going to focus on TDHCA requirements. So for the Home Partnership Program, the National Housing Trust Fund Program, and the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, participants must complete affirmative marketing housing requirements per 24 CFR 92.351 and 92.350. Here are the citations for Home and NHTF and NSP. Again, if you have direct funding, these are your requirements. And if you are a subrecipient of TDHCA's HUD-funded programs, the forms and requirements we cover today are going to help you meet your affirmative marketing requirements to the department. So just to boil this down into what the spirit of HUD requirements are in terms of affirmative marketing, they include specific instructions on how to affirmatively market to populations least likely to apply to properties that receive federal funding. They delineate these tasks to include to carry out an affirmative marketing program to attract buyers or tenants, regardless of protected class, to housing for sale or rental, to maintain a non-discriminatory hiring policy in recruiting from both minority and majority groups, including both sexes and the disabled, for staff engaged in the sale or rental of properties, also to instruct all employees and agents in writing and orally in the policy of non-discrimination and fair housing, and to prominently display in all offices in which sale or rental activity pertaining to the project or subdivision takes place the department-approved fair housing poster and include any printed material used in connection with sales or rental the department-approved equal housing opportunity logo, slogan, or statement. So now in this section, we'll talk about affirmative fair housing marketing plan requirements for single-family and multifamily properties that are participants in Tdhca programs. As a reminder, we will go through how to develop the affirmative marketing plan, including how to identify least likely to apply populations. For multifamily properties, the affirmative marketing plan requirement also applies to multifamily housing properties or all developments with 5 or more total units receiving federal funding. This includes affirmatively marketing the units to promote equal housing choice for prospective tenants, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, or disability. You must develop and carry out an affirmative fair housing marketing plan to provide for marketing strategies and documentation of outreach efforts to prospective applicants identified as least likely to apply. And an owner must update its affirmative marketing plan and populations that are least likely to apply every 5 years from the effective date of the current plan. What this boils down to is if you are a participant in any of Tdhca's multifamily programs, whether that be the Home Investment Partnerships program for multifamily properties or the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit program, these are the requirements that you have. If you are a participant in any of Tdhca's single-family programs that are HUD funded, Tdhca requires an affirmative marketing plan for any housing administrator that receives federal funds through the department. An affirmative marketing plan and affirmative marketing procedures are required for subgrantees of federal funds as well. Affirmative marketing procedures must continue throughout the length of the program, including the period of affordability. For single-family homeownership dwellings, the plan remains in effect until all the dwelling units are sold. The plan must be submitted to the department each time the administrator applies for a new contract or for a new type of activity, and must reflect marketing activities specific to the activity type. The administrator may submit a previously approved affirmative fair housing marketing plan if no changes need to be made. This plan must be submitted at a minimum of every 3 years if the administrator continues to accept new applications. An administrator that currently has an existing list of applicants and are not accepting new applicants or establishing a wait list are not required to affirmatively market until preparing to accept new applications, but you still must develop a plan. So per the requirement of the Texas Administrative Code rules, developers must develop an affirmative marketing plan. HUD has issued a worksheet titled HUD Form 935.2A for multifamily housing, which we encourage you to utilize to complete your affirmative marketing plan. It is up to you to use it, but at a minimum, the owner must document that they have compared the demographic composition of the development to the market area to determine the populations least likely to apply. Single-family administrators must use the affirmative fair housing marketing plan form on the department's website, the HUD Form 935.2B for single-family housing, or create an equivalent affirmative fair housing marketing plan that includes identification of the populations least likely to apply for the administrator's program without special outreach efforts. Administrators may use the department's single-family affirmative marketing tool to determine populations least likely to apply. If administrators use another method to determine the populations least likely to apply, the affirmative fair housing marketing plan must provide a detailed explanation of the methodology used. Persons with disabilities must always be included as a population least likely to apply. An administrator providing assistance in more than one service area, Tdhca service area, must provide a separate plan for each of those market areas in which the housing assistance will be provided. This form is available on the Tdhca website and is also included as a handout in the Handouts section for GoToWebinar. If you are looking on the Tdhca website, you can access the single-family affirmative marketing form on the department's compliance forms page. You can also access the forms from Tdhca's homepage by going to Support and Services and clicking on Compliance, then in the pop-up section, clicking on Forms. Once you're on that forms page, you can scroll down to the single-family affirmative marketing tools section to access the HUD form 935-2B. There you will also be able to find the single-family affirmative marketing tool. The single-family affirmative marketing tool will identify least likely to apply populations for you based upon the Tdhca service region that your program is in. While it is not required to use this tool, it does take a lot of the guesswork out and will help you to more easily identify your least likely to apply populations. And for multifamily, you will want to scroll a little bit further down on the compliance forms page to find the multifamily properties section and click on the current version of the HUD form 935-2A. These forms are also available for you to download in the handout section of the GoToWebinar platform today. So how do we determine least likely to apply populations for your plan? In order to determine which people are least likely to apply to your property, you must first indicate who is currently residing in the property. It is good practice to maintain demographic data of the tenants in your property and update that data on a regular basis. And in many cases, it is a requirement for you to keep this type of data. The single-family affirmative marketing tool is a group of PDFs that tell a single-family program administrator what the least likely to apply populations are for their activity and program and area of the state. Administrators can find this tool on the compliance forms page or at the link in this slide. For Colonial self-help centers and activities targeting eligible populations in Colonias, the affirmative marketing plan form already contains the least likely to apply populations that you need to market to. You will not need to do any additional work in this case, and this pre-filled form is also available on the compliance forms page. If you are not required by HOPA to accept households with children, you do not need to affirmatively market to households with children. However, if you are an elderly development that must accept otherwise qualified households with children, you do need to analyze whether this protected class is least likely to apply. And if you have HUD or USDA funds and are an elderly development, this likely applies to you. So you will likely need to analyze whether or not households with children would be a least likely to apply population. There has been some confusion in the past on this topic, and some land use restriction agreements require additional marketing to specific populations, such as veterans or farm workers. This is a Tdhca requirement, but not an affirmative marketing requirement, and outreach to these populations does not satisfy the community contacts for affirmative marketing purposes. The property demographic data is used to compare against the market area demographic data, which will show you if your property reflects the demographic makeup of the market area your property resides in. If you do not have your property demographic data regularly available, then you can compare your census tract data to your market data. And to determine which census tract you reside in, we will show you a couple of different ways to do this in the next couple of slides. So if you don't have property demographics, and it is possible that you won't, properties that are in lease up, or if you have just inherited a property from a different owner, then you may not have this data available. So you'll want to use data from your census tract instead. To find out what property your census tract is in, you can use either of these tools. I personally recommend the geomap.ffiec.gov link. The second tool includes a link to some of the necessary demographic data, but it does not have data on households with children. But it will reduce the amount of work that you'll need to do later on. Once you've found your census tract, or if you have your property demographic data, then you're ready to make the appropriate analysis to determine what your least likely to apply populations are. And so we're going to walk through now a scenario for how to determine least likely to apply populations using the American Community Survey, which is the most commonly used data source. So we're going to look at a particular census tract in Harris County. So here's the example. You are a property manager for a multifamily housing property in Harris County. You have to develop an affirmative marketing plan for your property, and your affirmative marketing plan needs to indicate how you will effectively market to potential tenants who are least likely to apply to your property. The first thing that you'll want to do is go to data.census.gov. You can click the link that's in the slide here, but you can also just type in data.census.gov and it will take you to the proper website. Once you get there, in the search bar, type in DP05. The ACS Demographic and Housing Estimates table will come up. Go ahead and click on that table. This will bring up a table that has data for the entire United States. So we're going to go ahead and find Texas. In the Geographies tab at the top, you'll want to click County and then click Texas, and you can type in or scroll to find Harris County. If you need to look up your census tract, you can do the same thing, which is instead of selecting county, select census tract, and then go through the selections. You'll select Texas, Harris County, and then you'll be able to find your census tract number. We'll go through this a little bit more later on as well. One thing to keep in mind is that if you are going to be using the American Community Survey, make sure you are always using the most recent 5-year estimates data profiles. And you'll see that that's highlighted here. The reason why you want to do that is in smaller areas and also in all census tracts, you will not have enough data or information to determine least likely to apply populations if you use the 1-year estimates. So always use the 5-year estimates. Like I said, if you are trying to find your census tract, you can select the census tract or tract geography and search through Texas and then Harris County, and you will be able to find your census tract there. In this particular instance, we're going to focus on Harris County Census Tract 5304. Once you've selected your geographies, you'll want to open the Hide button or click the Hide button and deselect everything except for percent. Anything that says percent, go ahead and keep that, but remove everything else. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to see what's going on in the table, and it's going to line everything up a lot more nicely. So from these columns, we will now be able to determine which would be a least likely to apply population. Anything that is below 1% of the population of the county or your market area would not need to be identified as a least likely to apply population. And this is just to give you an idea of what it looks like when you are searching for a census tract so that you can see exactly what it looks like when you do find it. You can often use the search in the top right here to type in the tract number, or you can scroll through. There will be a list there that you can scroll through instead. You must include households with children in your analysis if you are participating in a TDHCA monitored single family program or a TDHCA monitored multifamily property. The only exception, as we said earlier, is if you qualify as a Housing for Older Persons Act and you do not have any funding that requires you to accept otherwise qualified households with children. So to find the ACS data on households with children, you're going to follow the same steps that we outlined in the previous slides but instead of table DP05, you're going to use table S1101. Once you have found your property data or your market area data and have your property or census tract data, on your HUD form 935-2A or 2B, depending upon which one you are using, go ahead and enter the property demographics, census tract, or market area data into worksheet 1. So I think this might be a good place to see if we have any questions.
Okay. Hi, Nathan. Hi, everyone. This is Kate Trace. I'm the manager of Fair Housing. I have been monitoring the questions as Nathan has been going over the presentation. We just had a couple of questions that you had gotten to, but they were asked a little bit earlier. So I'll just go over these questions. So in case someone needs to hear it again. For the single family form, the 935-2A, there are two separate versions. I think that one of the versions that we've got on our website may not be the most recent version. Someone asked, could we use, a different version? And the answer is yes, really. The only difference between those two forms is like a tiny clerical or technical update in the instructions of the form. So if you're questioning which version of the single family form to use, either one works. If you've already got one filled out and you don't have updates to make, you can just resend us that same form and save yourself some time, as long as you know that your least likely to apply populations are the same. The next question was about what data to use if there's no one living in the project. Nathan, is this something that we're going to cover a little bit later?
We did cover it actually a little bit. So if you are in a project that hasn't been built yet, or it's still in lease up, so you don't have demographic data for your tenants or your property residents, what you can substitute in there is the data for your census tract. And so let me roll back to the slide where we show how to find your census tract. So if you are one of those properties that doesn't have enough data because you're in lease up or not built yet, this slide 24, is going to be super important for you. I recommend using that second link, although the first link also works. It will give you your census tract, and then if you see that button that says Census Demographic Data, it will also bring up all of the data that you need for that census tract. With the exception of households with children, you'll still need to go to the American Community Survey, table S1101, to find that, but that will give you all you need for the census tract.
Okay, and then a related question is if the property is leased up, if you do have tenants in your units, what would the source be for your demographics? And the answer to that is just use your unit status report. You've already got this information collected and reported, so just take the information from your unit status report and apply it to the 935 form for the multifamily programs. So it looks like we've got a couple of more questions coming in. Let's see if we can address these now or after the next segment. There's a question for multifamily properties. If you don't have HUD funds, if you're just a tax credit program, can you use the 935-2B form? Absolutely. Nathan, do you want to provide a little more detail to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 935-2B is one of the two acceptable forms to use if you are any multifamily property that is participating in a Tdhca program. It's just that if you are also layered with HUD funding, using the 935-2B covers kills two birds with one stone, because you will have the ability to submit that form to HUD and a Tdhca. But if you are just tax credit, you could absolutely use the 935-2B. The other option is to make sure that you can put together any other, the plan in any format that you want, as long as it is substantively the same as what's required in our Texas Administrative Code rules, much of which is covered by the 935-2B.
Okay. And then one more question about listing your marketing area demographics. How do you decide that marketing area? Is it your property, your expanded marketing area? Can you talk about what that area might look like outside of your property?
Right. So basically, when you are trying to find out or figure out what your service area is, or your market area, a lot of times, especially for single family programs, that's going to already be determined, because a lot of subrecipients are, say, a city. So you obviously know that the city is the market area. You can't service anything outside of the city. But for multifamily properties, it's a little bit more difficult, especially in Texas. So let's say you are in somewhere west of Fort Worth. So Fort Worth is part of the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan statistical area. But if you're west of Fort Worth, you're probably not including Dallas or east of Dallas as part of your market area. So it's going to depend a little bit on where your property is and where you seem to draw people from. The second part of that question is, do you need to have the expanded marketing area? The expanded marketing area, and that's referring to worksheet 1 on the 935-2B, is really only for situations where you don't find any least likely to apply populations. You may want to expand the market area to say, using the same example, go ahead and include Dallas to see if it makes if any least likely to apply populations appear. If not, then you don't worry about it. But it's really it's A, not required, and B, it's really only a useful tool in some cases where you don't have enough data in a market area, and you need to look out and expand or look a little bit further. Actually, another example might be if you are a fairly small county, and there are some of those here in Texas, and you think, okay, the county, I have a property in this county, so the county's my market area. Well, you may not have enough data in that county to make any kind of determination as to what is a least likely to apply population. At that point in time, you might want to start branching out and including neighboring counties. So again, though, not necessarily required except in some of those fringe cases.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. So there's just one more question on the final slide in the last section of the presentation. There was a question about what the columns were.
These here on
yes.
slide 31?
Yes.
Right. So if you have, the first column here is if you have for multifamily property, if you have what your residents look like. So this would be what's in your unit status report. Project applicant data is not necessarily something that you need to worry about in many cases, because you're going to have, you're more likely to have tenant or resident data than you are to have applicant data. But they can be used interchangeably. If you are truly trying to figure out who is least likely to apply, you can look at your application lists, but a lot of times those applicant lists don't have all of the demographic data that you would need, so it's hard to make that determination. The third column is the census tract, and that is if you don't have any resident or applicant data, then you'll want to use the census tract data. And then the final two are the housing market area and the expanded housing market area, which is what we talked about. And you're almost always going to be comparing something in the first three columns to something in the last two columns. So that's what those columns are all about.
Okay, I think that's a good place to pause on the questions and keep going with our community contact section.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to try to find community contacts. So let's say, for example, you've completed your research to identify populations that are least likely to apply to your housing property. And that you've identified African Americans and people with disabilities. And persons with disabilities, again, like we said, is always needs to be selected as least likely to apply. Part of your affirmative marketing plan is to indicate how you will market to these populations. So part of affirmatively marketing to these populations is contacting organizations and groups within their communities and introduce yourself and your property's availability. We advise you to begin your search using whatever resources you have readily available, and you can brainstorm with your coworkers who might identify with one of the demographic groups identified as least likely to apply. So these are just some examples for the two populations that we have in our example. There is another question, which is, this often comes up, can you use contacts like Asian markets or Asian groceries? And the answer is probably yes. It's if the clientele of the Asian market or Asian grocer is primarily Asian, then that would count as a community contact and certainly would be a place if Asian was listed as a least likely to apply population. Certainly a place where you'd want to look. Another thing that comes up, you might also find that a least likely to apply population might be white or non-Hispanic in your area. And that's actually completely normal in a lot of parts of Texas, especially in the Valley and out towards El Paso. A least likely to apply population does not automatically infer that it has to be people of color or a minority. And so just simply go through the same process that you would anyway to identify community contacts, where this group might frequent, places of worship, community centers are some good examples. One thing to remember is that while it may seem strange to affirmatively market to what is ostensibly a majority population, the reasoning behind it is still the same, which is to avoid concentration of minority groups or protected classes in any one particular property or area. Some other things that you could do would be to use some online resources such as Policy Map, 211texas.org. There's also the One Star Foundation, though that is a fee-based service. Some examples of other organizations that you might want to reach out to might be health clinics, community action agencies, or other community-based charitable organizations like the Salvation Army. Consider contacting your local city or county planning and development department, or utilize some nonprofit or business directories from your local chamber of commerce. And again, like I said, while it may seem odd, it is possible that a majority group such as white may be identified as a least likely to apply population. The reason why outreach to these non-minority groups is still important is that it will help to alleviate or avoid concentration of minority groups on a single property or specific neighborhoods. Some land use restriction agreements do require additional marketing to some specific populations, such as veterans or farm workers. This is a TDHCA requirement, but it's not an affirmative marketing requirement, and community contacts for these groups do not count toward the minimum required number of community contacts for affirmative marketing purposes. We do recognize the requirement for general marketing to veterans and the requirement of affirmative marketing to least likely to apply populations have been listed together in many TDHCA documents and rules. This has led some to believe that marketing to veterans should be included in affirmative marketing requirements. However, these two requirements are separate from each other. Further, we recognize that compliance monitoring issues have arisen for properties that did not include veterans in their affirmative marketing plans. In May of 2020, oversight of affirmative marketing moved from compliance to the Fair Housing Group at TDHCA. To clarify this confusion, the department is working to update language in several places to make it clear that general marketing to veterans should not be included with affirmative marketing plans. These places include in TAC code, CMTS screens, AOCR reports, and land use restriction agreement templates going forward. The Fair Housing team will work with properties who include veterans on their affirmative marketing plans to make sure that the requirements for affirmative marketing are still met. If revising your plan removes veterans or one or more of your community if revising your plan to remove veterans removes one or more of your community contacts, this next slide may help you figure out what to do to find new community contacts to add to your plan. So if you can't find any contacts for your least likely to apply populations, you do need to document those reasons within your affirmative marketing plan. So, for example, say your market area is a small rural town with a small Asian population. After conducting your search and identifying Asian as least likely to apply, you attempt to find community contacts. However, there's no local chamber of commerce, place of worship, or grocery store that is based within that community or primarily serves that community. You need to document the process to this discovery, and these reasons must be provided with supporting evidence. So here is an example from real life, actually, and this is a single-family program in Slaton, Texas. So one of the things that we did was we found in Slaton, Texas, which is near, I believe, Amarillo or Abilene, I'm not sure which one. Lubbock, near Lubbock. So Slaton, Texas has a population of about 3,000 people, and it's in Lubbock County, which is TDHCA Region 1. So we pulled the single-family affirmative marketing tool for Region 1 for homeowner rehabilitation projects or activities. And that tool does indicate that Asian is the least likely to apply population for that activity. Slaton has a very small Asian population, so there's just no community contacts serving that group. What we thought was to try to figure out where the community works. On the map is a tool that is generated by the Census Bureau that can help you to figure this out. And this is just one example of what you might do to figure out, to document that you have searched for community contacts. The website for On the Map is on this slide as well. And all you have to do is search for your city or town or county, whatever your market area or small or whatever your property area is, and then use the settings that are on this image here. So you want to select destination analysis for all jobs, and you want to base it upon where people live. So you want to find out where people who live in Slaton work. You can select the destination, which is cities. You can also make it counties if it's something that you want, but I like to use places because it gives you more specific output. Use the most current data that's available. On the map is sometimes lags behind what's available from the American Community Survey. And then you just hit this go button. And this is what you will see. We found that only 11% of the people who live in Slaton work in Slaton, but that over half of the people who live in Slaton work in Lubbock. So Lubbock, if you find Asian grocers, Asian chambers of commerce, or other groups that serve primarily an Asian clientele, those would be possible contacts to look for in Lubbock that you could use in your affirmative marketing plan. So not all towns are going to have such an obvious answer, but you want to document taking steps like these so that you have the evidence that you at least looked for contacts. And like I said, as a reminder, this is just an example of one way that you might look for community contacts for your plan. If you need technical assistance on finding community contacts, please reach out to the Fair Housing staff at Tdhca. The affirmative marketing plan form also requires you to include which media outlets you will utilize to market your property's availability. Tdhca does not require disclosing your media outreach on the affirmative marketing forms, nor does it require specific media outreach. But feel free to include it if you have it. It's not going to cause your plan to be non-compliant. So now let's look at some procedures for implementing your affirmative marketing plan. As mentioned previously in the community contacts and media section, the following is required for when you put your plan into motion. Once per calendar year, you should conduct special outreach efforts through specific media organizations and those community contacts that you've found. Tdhca indicates a minimum of 3 organizations with whom you plan to conduct outreach. For multifamily, those outreach efforts must be performed at least once per calendar year. For single family, there's no specific timeline, but outreach must be conducted whenever you are accepting new applications. For single-family home ownership programs, affirmative marketing is required as long as you're accepting applications or until all dwelling units have been sold. Persons with disabilities, again, must always be included as a population least likely to apply. And again, veterans and other populations, such as farm workers, are not a least likely to apply population. However, you might be required to market to veterans or other populations per your land use restriction agreement. This requirement is separate from affirmative marketing, and because veterans are not a protected class under federal and Texas fair housing laws, you should not put your marketing efforts to veterans in your affirmative marketing plan. Per Texas Administrative Codes, Chapter 10.801 for multifamily and Tdhca 20.9 for single family, the fair housing logo must be contained in any materials used for advertising or marketing related to the housing development. The materials must also include the contact information for the individual who can assist if reasonable accommodations are needed in order to complete the application process. The property contact information must also be provided in English and Spanish and may be required to be provided in other languages in accordance with limited English proficiency requirements, which we will talk about on Thursday if you join us for our Language Access Plan and Limited English Proficiency webinar. So in addition to the Fair Housing logo, the Equal Opportunity Insignia also includes a statement and a slogan. The slogan is Equal Housing Opportunity. The Equal Housing Opportunity Statement is, we are pledged to the letter and spirit of U.S. policy for the achievement of equal housing opportunity throughout the nation. We encourage and support an affirmative advertising and marketing program in which there are no barriers to obtaining housing because of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. HUD requires that your print materials show at least one of those items. It can be the logo, which is what is shown on the screen now, the slogan, which is just equal housing opportunity, or that long statement that we just read. While Tdhca's rules specifically indicate that the logo should be used. There are additional requirements regarding the size of the Fair Housing logo. Please make sure you determine what size logo is necessary based upon the size of your print materials. So for print ads, for a half page or larger, it is advised that you use a 2-inch by 2-inch logo. For an eighth of a page, or anything between an eighth and a page and a half of a page, use a 1-inch by 1-inch logo. And for ads that are 4 column inches to 1/8 of a page, use a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch logo. For non-print ads, your logo should be as large as the largest of other logos used. And just to reiterate here, this is another area where we have seen some confusion. If you include the Equal Housing Opportunity logo, which is what is shown on the screen here, the house with the equal sign that says Equal Housing Opportunity underneath it, that is all you would need on your print materials for TDHCA's purposes. And it would meet requirements for, it would meet HUD's requirements as well. TDHCA requires affirmative marketing efforts for each of the identified populations least likely to apply to begin at least 6 months prior to the anticipated date the first building is to be made available for occupancy. It says 90 days on the Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing form, the HUD forms, but TDHCA requires 6 months. This is one of the only places where TDHCA and HUD requirements differ significantly. So make sure that you are beginning your affirmative marketing outreach 6 months at least before the anticipated date of first occupancy. Affirmative marketing plans in populations that are least likely to apply you must update your affirmative marketing plans and populations every 5 years for multifamily properties and every 3 years from the effective date of the current plan for single-family programs. Owners must maintain records of each affirmative marketing plan and specific outreach efforts completed for the greater of 3 years or the record-keeping requirements identified in your land use restriction agreement. There is an exception to the affirmative marketing requirement. If your development has a closed waitlist, affirmative marketing is not required. Affirmative marketing is required as long as the owner is accepting applications, has an open waitlist, or is marketing prior to a multifamily development placement in service. The waitlist policy for single-family programs is a requirement and is there to make sure that applicants are not selected for service on a first-come, first-served basis. Remember that TDHCA may request to review your affirmative marketing plan at any time, so make sure that your plan is always ready. And if you wish to submit your affirmative marketing plan for TDHCA for voluntary review by TDHCA staff, you can email your plan to fair.housing@tdhca.state.tx.us. That email address is on the screen right now. We also provide trainings like this regularly. However, we do not provide certifications. We do provide technical assistance and one-on-one trainings by request. There is also TDHCA Single Family Affirmative Marketing Plan Assistance Guide in the handouts. That is an awesome tool to utilize, and it further breaks down into depth how to complete your affirmative marketing plan. So at this point, we are able to take any more questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nathan. This is Kate Trace again. We've got a couple of questions in. I think I'm going to take these, Nathan, if you can see them in reverse order, because some are coming in that refer to what you just talked about. So we have a question: who certifies the plan? So when someone voluntarily submits their question or their plan to TDHCA, that would be Nathan and myself. We're the fair housing staff at TDHCA, so we will review it. We have a review sheet that goes that looks at all of the elements that we've laid out in the Texas Administrative Code requirements and make sure that you've filled out the plan completely. And there might be some back and forth and technical assistance, but at the end of the process, the fair housing staff at TDHCA will let you know if your plan is compliant or not, and we will help you to get it to a compliant certified state.
So, Kate, I was just reading that question, and it sounds like it's a Section 202.
Oh, the next one that came in. Okay. I see.
So who would that plan be submitted to? That would be submitted to HUD.
Yes.
Because I don't know that we administer any Section 202 funds.
We do not. That's correct.
And then
Go ahead.
there may be another question, and I think that's why there might be two questions on this same sort of topic, which is who certifies the plan. HUD requires a signature on the fair housing, the affirmative marketing plans, as long as it is anybody who would be responsible for updating or implementing the plan. It can be a signature from them, and it can also be a signature from an executive director. So that's a very tiny little bit of information for if you have to apply or send your affirmative marketing plan to HUD and you're trying to figure out who needs to sign/certify it before you send.
Okay, there's been a couple of questions about the fair housing slogan, that really long thing that you read out. Folks asking for it in writing. I think that following the webinar, we can send that out to all of the attendees here in writing, and then post it on our website with the materials that we post from this webinar, just so you don't have to go hunting for that extra long slogan if it's something that you wanted to include in your marketing materials.
Yes, and also remember, if you are submitting your material, if you are, working on an affirmative marketing plan that you will be submitting to Tdhca, Tdhca requirements are for the logo, which is the house with the equal sign that says equal housing opportunity underneath it. That long slogan is not compliant for Tdhca affirmative marketing plans. We'll still send those out to you, but just that's an important thing to remember, is that you want to use just the house logo.
Great, thank you. So the next two questions I want to tackle are about the actual printed material or the newspaper ads that that properties or single-family administrators are using. Nathan, you had mentioned that that the properties don't have to include their actual their media outreach or their media contacts. Does that mean that they don't have to actually submit the ads in the plan?
Yeah, that would be correct. So because Tdhca does not require media contacts, it just requires community contacts. Those ads don't need to be submitted. Feel free to submit them with your plan. There's no reason, if you've already got them in there, to add work and separate them out. It's just not something that I'm going to go through and look. I might offer technical assistance on it, but it will not be anything that we look at for non-compliance.
Great. And then the next question is, someone uses green sheets or classifieds to perform their outreach and marketing. And the question is, does this mean that I only need to post an ad once a year?
No, because again, like I said, our ads are not the same. So the ads or advertising in media is not the same as your community contacts. You need to do your community contacts. You need to reach out to them at least once a year. Advertising, if you are submitting to HUD your affirmative marketing plan and your advertisement, then yes, that needs to be done every year. But that is, Tdhca isn't looking at your media outreach, it's looking at your community contacts outreach. And that does need to be done once a year.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions, Nathan, towards the bottom. Are there one of those that you wanted to take?
Yeah, actually, I can go ahead and take both of them if you want. So the question is, are there any legal concerns affirmatively marketing to non-protected groups that are not required, with the understanding that this would not count towards toward affirmative marketing plans? The answer to that is a qualified yes, no. And I know that is the exact wrong answer that nobody wanted. It entirely depends upon what that non-protected group is and whether it would run afoul of, or whether it would go against the grain with a protected class. So one example that we've talked about a bunch is veterans and farm workers. Veterans are, demographically speaking, far more likely to be male and white and non-Hispanic. So if veterans is a group that you are affirmatively reaching out to and it's not required by your LURA, then it could be problematic if your property has a least likely to apply population of Hispanic or of any group that is not white as well. So it really depends upon your situation. There are cases where it will be problematic, cases where it won't be problematic. So the next question that came in was for low-income housing tax credit. You would submit your affirmative marketing plan to Tdhca, but for multifamily bond, you submit to HUD. That is not correct. Multifamily bonds are administered through Tdhca. So if your multifamily bonds came through Tdhca, you would still submit the plan to Tdhca in that case.
And Nathan, what about if a property had layered funding? They would still use the same plan regardless of whether it's tax credit or HUD funding. They could certainly use the same plan and form. You don't have to have separate forms for different funding sources on your property. It's just one plan for the property regardless of what the funding is.
Right, exactly. Trying to see if there are any others that we haven't hit yet.
Okay, there's one question about if the property is a post-15 tax credit property. So depending on what phase they are with Tdhca, if they don't need to advertise, would affirmative marketing be required or not?
So so the post-15 post-monitoring period, what is required for general marketing, I do not know. You will want to direct that part of the question to compliance, but post-15, you still need to be doing your affirmative marketing, which would be to your community contacts. Green Sheet, I don't know what Green Sheet is. I'm not familiar with Green Sheet.
It's classifieds.
Oh, okay. So, you'll want to check to make sure what your compliance requirements are for advertising or general marketing post-15, but you definitely still need to do affirmative marketing post-15.
Great. So I think those are all the questions that we've got. We were able to get to all the questions, I believe. There's the one that I missed. Okay. One more question. So how would you determine the family percentage for project residents? So I think this question goes back to determining the demographics within a project or a property. Nathan,
Right.
did you want to try to tackle that one?
Yeah. So your unit status report, because I'm assuming this is going to be for a multifamily property, and I'll talk about single family afterward. But for a multifamily property, your unit status report should have the number of households with children, or minor children, which would be children under the age of 18. So, and this is something that you would need to know, right? You would know if you require anybody who's 18 and over to be listed on the lease. So if you have 3 people listed on a lease and 4 people listed as being in the household, you know that one of them is under 18 at that point. So you know that you have a household with children. And so that's how you would determine how many households with children you have. And then you would just divide that by the total number of households that you have. So if you have 302 full units and, well, let's say 300. I don't want to make the math hard. 300 units and 100 of them have households with children, your households with children percentage would be 33.3 repeating percent. If you're a single family program, it's a little bit more difficult, which is why we do recommend using the single family affirmative marketing tool. But there are ways to figure it out where you would look at, so your city's, the average household size and average family household size in your city and compare that to a larger market area to see if you don't have a lot of households with children in them. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but it's probably the easiest way to do it for a single family program, which is again why I definitely recommend using the single family affirmative marketing tool.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. So I think we've answered all of the questions that have come in. If you want to wrap it up, that would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we just want to say thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Like I said, if you have questions for us, you can reach out to us. I'll put the contact information up here again. You can reach out to me by phone number, and I also, Kate and myself, check both of those listed email addresses. Try using the fair.housing one. It's a lot easier to remember off the top of your head. And we also do one-on-one trainings on these, and we can help you with technical assistance if you have specific questions about a specifically likely to apply population in your property. We can try to help you with that too. So thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.